Mr. President, I want to talk a few minutes about the challenges that really so many of our cabinet members face, we face trying to restore our infrastructure, to maintain our park system, to create the public-private partnerships that the President mentioned earlier this week in his vision for infrastructure reform. Certainly, Governor Perry, who we're debating his nomination right now, will have many opportunities in energy to do that, and the research components of energy and the partnership components that can be there. We just confirmed the new Secretary of Interior, Ryan Zinke, and in the one of our great assets as a nation is the federal park system. We're now entering the second 100 years of that federal park system, and that second 100 years is going to be defined by partnerships in ways the first 100 years haven't. The park system is a great way to not only enjoy the blessings we have of where we're located and the rich geography, the scenic beauty. Some of these parks really reflect the great challenges that people face as they settle the country, but also they're historic parks that reflect the history. Sometimes our parks do both of those things. All of my colleagues, I think, are aware of the Gateway Arch in St. Louis, one of the most visited national parks. The Jefferson Memorial, Expansion Memorial there, celebrating President Jefferson, celebrating the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and really celebrating that long movement as people moved west, eventually really west and really northwest, Mr. President, where you live in Alaska. But the Gateway Arch is visited often. It was opened in 1967, and so now we're 50 years into that particular part of our system, and the original park itself needed a lot of restoration. But 50 years later, you look at that park and you look at how it's been used and decide how it could be better used. And what most of my colleagues probably aren't aware of is right now it's the biggest investment that the National Park Service is making in the system at this moment, trying to connect the Great Gateway Arch to the old courthouse in St. Louis, the federal courthouse where the Dred Scott case was tried, trying to connect that park to the rest of the city in ways that when it was built, separated by an interstate highway, and so you'd go see the park, but you wouldn't get to the rest of the national park site there very often. So rethinking that's all important. But what's maybe even more important is this is the biggest project in the history of the country where private donors provided more of the money, the biggest park project where private donors provided more of the money than the government did. Now, it's not easily done. If for 100 years you've been doing something one way, it's not easy to immediately begin to say, well, we're going to do it another way from now on. If you're in charge, like Secretary Jewell was put in charge of this project, and by the way, I think has done a good job understanding, as has her regional director, understanding that if you're going to do things different, they have to be different. There was it'd be great if the city and private donors, the city even voted a tax just for this project to provide millions of dollars of what the project would be spending. And of course, I think initially the Park Service would be, isn't that great? We now get this money from private donors, and we now get this money from a city tax, in addition to a portion of the money we're still getting from appropriated by the Congress, and we'll just spend it like we've always spent it, as if we had no partners. But that didn't work out very well. Mr. President, that didn't work well at all. The partners in the project actually wanted to be partners in the project. And as we look at the next 100 years of this great national park system, I think we have to understand that for that to work and for that to work in a new way, you've got to treat it differently. And we're seeing that in St. Louis. We're seeing the 3 different groups come together in ways that have provided the funding, but frankly, they also need to be at the table when you talk about how you're going to spend the funding. We changed the law in Congress just a couple of years ago so that private money, if it's being held by the federal government, as it has been on that project, if there's any interest to be earned, if there's any benefit from that money, it also goes to the project rather than going into general revenue. The goal here would be to do everything we can if we're going to have a different park system for the next 100 years to really encourage the next group of people to step up and say, we want to provide, as in the case in St. Louis and in Missouri, we want to provide more than half of the money. But we'd like to have some input on how that's going to be used and how this is going to meet the needs of the community, but also everybody who visits there as they connect with the community uniquely in that St. Louis park. You know, Missouri has a great park system. I think we're rated as one of the top 4 park systems in the country in our state system. And in fact, right now we're looking at one of those state parks at St. Genevieve, which was a part of our state that was first settled by French settlers, and a number of buildings there dating right back to the turn of the 19th century, 1801, 1804, are really reflective of how French settlers built buildings, which was different than how other settlers did. There's a lot to learn about how we come together as a people in so many of our parks as well. So when Secretary Zinke takes that job, one of the new opportunities is to build on what's already started in places like St. Louis and figure out how we can have those kinds of partnerships. When the president talks about infrastructure expansion and how we're going to look at new ways to do that, as you look at new ways to do that, you have to really be willing to think of how you approach this in a way that encourages partners to be part of it. You know, clearly infrastructure, one of our great benefits of where we're located is where we're located. We've got an ocean on 2 sides. We've got a river that runs up the middle of the country that connects the country in unique ways to all the water travel of the world. We've got these coasts on each side that are really beneficial to this if we connect ourselves in the right ways. And so the president's view that the road system, the airport system, the port system all need to work in a way that links us up to be better competitors, and links us up in a way that allows us to create economic opportunities and better jobs for families, all important. So that's that kind of partnership. The partnership the park system is in, I think, is we're seeing the mold established, the model established for how that would work in St. Louis right now at the Arch. That project in the next couple of years will be completed. It'll be different than it was 50 years ago because people want to see things different than they did 50 years ago. And with Secretary Perry, who should be confirmed today, I think clearly will be confirmed today, his opportunities in energy to look for partners that add to what we can do there in ways we haven't thought of before, just like we use research money now. To take that research money in health research, research money in ag research, to bring other people into this discussion that creates opportunities for who we can be. And so as we now slowly and in a way that has really made it difficult to take advantage of the first of this new administration, we're apparently going to be able to confirm 2 nominees to the cabinet today, but we're still way behind any measure, the whole history of the country, in working with the new administration to let them take responsibility. There are going to be 500 to 1,000 nominees, about 12. I think there's about 1,000 deputy secretaries and undersecretaries that come once we're done with the cabinet. I hope we can all find a way to get this done with an understanding that whether you agree with the election or not, the election was held. And the new administration has the responsibility for government. It's the job of the Senate and the Senate alone to be sure that those cabinet officers and the people that support those cabinet officers and departments are put in place early as well. So looking at the park system, looking at partnership, looking at how important it is that we're willing to do things in a different way is something we ought to be thinking about in this week, that we confirm a Secretary of Commerce, a Secretary of Interior, and later today, a Secretary of Energy. And I would, Mr. President, yield the floor.